Welcome to Life-Changing Challengers, the podcast where passion meets purpose. I'm Brad Minus, your host, guiding you through stories of transformation and triumph, from endurance feats to overcoming adversity. Our guests defy the limits and inspire action. Ready to ignite your desire and incinerate your barriers? Join us. Your journey to the extraordinary begins now. And welcome back to another episode of Life-Changing Challengers. As always, I am Brad Minus, your host. And today we are so lucky to have Larry Bilotta on Life-Changing Challengers today. He is a relationship expert, author, and speaker. And he specializes in midlife crisis. And he is the creator of a series of successful programs designed to help couples. And he's going to tell us a little bit about his story and give us some information on how maybe we can help with the state of marriages that we have today in America. So, Larry, how are you today?
I'm at the top of my game.
That's what I like to hear. So, Larry, can you tell us a little bit about your childhood, like where you grew up, what was the complement of your family, and what was it like to be Larry as a kid?
So that is the big question. Actually started my whole path down this childhood story, because that's the big thing that I talk about in what I'm doing and helping people, is a childhood decides everything. And the reason it decides everything is because everything gets poured in those first 10 years. And the idea of ideas coming into the subconscious, into the mind, is an idea that we can't handle. We can't, like, what's that? The ideas come into the mind. So what I have for parents is I have an alcoholic mother and a gambling father. Now, that's not what their star role was. That happened to be what affected me the most, right? The gambling father and the alcoholic mother don't have a lot of time to pay attention to you because they're actually pursuing their pursuits. So they're both very talented people, very artistic, very creative, very talented people, very soft-hearted people. They weren't hard, weren't tough, right? So I kind of grew up in this Chicago environment where everything was about them leaving, going somewhere, to be with people, to entertain and do the things they love to do. So my father played 13 instruments and my mother was a singer, right? So all that stuff was a part of this little Larry growing up in this environment of, like, when is mom coming home? We don't know. We don't know when mom's coming home, because she may not come home. You may be asleep, like, or go to sleep. And that's how she's going to arrive, right? So like Santa Claus. So growing up with an alcoholic and a gambler, what it does is it causes the subconscious of the heart of my mind to be taking in ideas which are, you're not important, but they have interests. Their interests are outside of you, away from you. And so that's where the beginning of abandonment and abuse and neglect, the three pillars of a chaos childhood, are. And so that's really what was happening to me. I was actually growing up in chaos. And so I was getting the ideas of chaos, the ideas of being abandoned, the ideas of being neglected, the ideas of being abused. And so now that stuff is forming me. And so I'm soft-hearted, though. So as a soft-hearted person, I really care about who likes who and who likes me and who's, nice to me. So what I ended up doing when I got into my 20s, I started to be looking for strength. And I was looking for strength, not obviously. I wasn't consciously even saying that, but I was feeling it. I was feeling a longing for strength because my parents were not strong people. They were really soft-hearted people. So I was soft-hearted, they were soft-hearted, and there was no plan in my life at all. No plan to do anything, to become anything. So I'm drifting in my early 20s, and I start calling out, really privately in my mind, I'm calling out for strength. And who I attract is a strong woman, and she's really strong, right? I talk about her being the strongest woman I've ever met. So what does she grow up in? She grows up in a childhood where she was born to fight, because that's what her parents were. They were, when they wanted to get your attention, they threw something at you, so that there was a yelling and there was a meanness to that. And so that's what I marry into. And so when I take my soft-hearted culture of mine and put it into this hard-natured culture of her childhood, now we're combined into this soft and hard world. She's soft, I'm soft-hearted, she's hard-natured. I don't find this until lots of Eddie Spider. But that's what happens. And so she's now ready to be a kamikaze on her last mission. She's ready to just destroy whatever needs to be destroyed to make her point, to be right, to whatever she's got to do. Well, I don't have that kind of determination. I don't have that kind of fight. It's not built into my mind. So since I don't have that, I have to find some way, because we're married now. By the way, we're talking about 1974, and that's the year they impeached Nixon, right?
Right.
That's the year we get started. And so we get married, and what should be very curious to me is that her parents had no interest in asking about my parents. My parents had no interest in asking about her parents. In fact, they never brought each other up, ever. And so that's a complete, absolute energy disconnection right there. And I should have said, like, how come my parents and your parents don't ever want to talk to each other? Never asked that question. I just, well, like when you're really young, you don't think these kinds of thoughts, right? Because you think none of that stuff matters. Just like I thought childhood didn't matter. But I came years and years later and to find out that childhood doesn't just matter. Childhood literally is everything, because the messages are down there. And when they come up, let's think about the mind is a big vat. It's divided into the lower part and the upper part. And so the lower part is filled with really a lot of turmoil thoughts, because abandonment, abuse, and neglect are actually turmoil thoughts. They're turmoil ideas. And when they come up and they grab your personality and they make you want to do something that you don't normally do. And so that's really what I call the chaos kid. The chaos kid is the person raised in chaos. And so I have to start with my scale 10 down to 0, because I was raised in chaos. So what was the chaos? The chaos was mom and dad didn't want to come home. Mom and dad didn't want to pay attention to me. Mom and dad didn't want to make me important, right? So that's the environment I grow up in. That's what my mind is built around. So what happens to me is I'm like a kid kind of on the streets, because at that time it was called latchkey, right?
Yep.
It's a kind name. But what it was is you're free to roam around. And so like people in the baby boomers, they talk about, we're free to go wherever we want to do whatever we want, right? And so I was one of those kids, free to do whatever. And so with me roaming around, what am I roaming around to do? I was roaming around to get sugar, right? That was my heroin. And heroin was sugar to me. And so what I did is I started to eat a lot of sugar. And so when you eat that as a kid, I started getting ear infections. And what happened is I woke up in pain, and then I woke up my mother and father, who went to bed really late because they were out entertaining and doing all these things, right? So I woke them up, and that became a big thing to get their attention. So when I was waking them up at night, they were starting to say, we got to pay attention to health. We got to pay attention to what he's eating, right? And so they started to think about, what are you eating? And anything I want, mom and dad, here you go. And my choice is sugar. That's my heroin, right? So with me being this sugar addict that I'd become, because I'm really looking for love is what I'm looking for. And because I'm looking for love and not finding it, I'm going to sugar as my gang. And then they start getting health oriented. And so as typical extreme people do, they became extremely health oriented. And so one of the things they did is they got involved in a magazine back in the 50s called Prevention Magazine.
Right.
So Prevention Magazine was J.I. Rodale. And I heard that over and over and over again. And so I heard them preaching to me about the evils of, all these things they had listed. And so when I married Marcia, the strongest woman in the world, I don't know that she's raised on meanness. She's raised on a hardness that demands that you be crushed to stop your whatever your problem is. And so I have a completely different value system, and she has a completely different value system. So my value system is foundation is shutting down. When I get upset, when I get worried, I shut down. I stop talking. I close up. I leave the room, right? That's my version, right? Her version is when you shut down, I come and get you and I come and make you pay attention. So that was our little combination, right? Which is like a painful combination. So what did all this pain do? The pain made it possible for me to say, I'm going to go insane here, because I realized much later that I was programmed by my parents, and she was programmed by her parents, with one message: stay married, stay miserable. That was the message. Stay married, stay miserable. God. So strong, we couldn't fight it at all. We couldn't resist it. We couldn't even argue with it. Stay married, stay miserable. So no matter how ugly things got, it was like, is there an exit here? Nope, no exit. There's no door out. This is the place you had to be. Well, now that I know that there's no exit, I can't get out of this place. I have to decide, what am I going to do? And now I get to this life-changing challengers idea, Brad, right? What is my life-changing challenge? My life-changing challenge is I've got to decide what this means. What does this chaotic childhood mean? What does this marriage mean with this really hard woman? And I'm so soft because I don't have the strength to fight this girl, right? So I'm not going to compete with her on the strength of fighting, because that was her star strength. The only way I could deal with getting through this is for me to become the learner, because she was not a learner. She learned in her own unseen format, her own unseen school. And you can't actually tell her anything. You can't teach her anything. She won't let anything in. So there's nothing there to cause her to learn except her own discoveries, which she did privately. So what I had to realize is I'm going to be the learner. I got to learn what's happening to me, and why do I do what I do? Why does she do what she does? And so I started to ask all kinds of why questions that I never would have done if I didn't have that pain. So I've trapped lots of pain. I'm very motivated. And so what the challenge was is become a learner, become a student of this. And so what I started to do is I started to write ideas out on legal pads, on yellow paper, and I started to write it out, pages and pages and pages of notes. And also, remember, this is what I call the 27 years of a marriage made in hell, right? Why do I call it that? Because it was 27 years. So I entered it when they impeached Nixon, threw Nixon out. And I got out of the 27 years when they elected the second Bush. So that's how long it was in the U.S. time frame. So living in that 27 years, that's a long time and very messy, very sloppy. The discovery process is not neat and clean at all. It's very messy. It's very chaotic. So all these events happen with me being soft and her being hard, me being shutting down and her being confrontational. So that is the essence of what I later discovered, is there's a whole bunch of couples who get married in the world today who are soft-hearted and hard-natured. And so what I found out is there's a pattern of strong women attracting soft-hearted men. There's lots of them, thousands and thousands of them. So somewhere in this, I wrote a book called Soft-Hearted Woman, Hard World, and it was completely off target. The reason is soft-hearted women don't want a book. But what I should have written is hard-natured woman, soft-hearted man, because it turns out that when these hard women, when their marriage starts falling apart because their soft-hearted man starts doing what I did, he starts shutting down and running away. That's what soft-hearted men do. But hard-natured women, they don't deal with it very well. They don't handle it in a way that's going to be constructive. And so what they'll do is turn up their strength on their soft-hearted man. And what the soft-hearted man will do is he will not have this program that says stay married or stay married. He doesn't have that guard, right? What he has is, well, mom left, I'll leave, right? That's what he has, right? And she doesn't know that he was built in those first 10 years by a leaving mother or a leaving father. And if that's what he's built on, that's what he's going to go to. That means he has a license to leave. And so if she keeps on this hard-natured way, he's going to just exit, and he's going to exit with some kind of girlfriend.
So at what point do you think that they realize this?
It's not about realizing, because the soft-hearted man I'm talking about is a chaos kid. Okay.
Right.
That means on my scale, he's down between 5 and 0 at some version of abandonment, abuse, and neglect. That's what's in him. And so now he's got to do the things of the abandonment, abuse, and neglect world, the chaotic world, because the scale goes 10, 9, 8. That's purpose. And that's where you're raised with values like service and compassion and loyalty and commitment. You see those kinds of things, that becomes normal for you. It's kind of like your childhood, right? You're actually built with that kind of software inside. So these hard women, they don't necessarily have that. If they were raised in a really good childhood, then it becomes a matter of, I believe in marriage. I believe in my vows. I'm strong, right? So that becomes their stance. Their stance is to be strong and fight and bowl somebody over, right? But that's not the way the soft-hearted men can handle anything. They don't handle anything that way. And so what the whole way of the hard-natured woman what she has to turn her ship is she has to turn her ship to a softer side. She has to go to the softer side of this whole hard, soft world. And as she moves to her softer side, she starts to back off with her demands, with her requirements, with her inquisitions of like, where were you and why did you do this, right? She stops all of that. And when she stops all that, and I see this in my program, I call it the environment changer. And the reason it's called environment changer is because you change the environment of your mind. That's the environment you're changing. And so if a hard-natured woman is married to a soft-hearted man, she has to change the environment of her mind. That means her mind's got to move to the softer side. That doesn't mean like releasing him from all responsibility. That means she's got to literally take back in her delivery a kind of softer kindness, a love orientation, of a forgiveness, a releasing of her pressure. And I've seen this, and I've talked about hundreds and hundreds of women I've talked to over the years. In fact, I'll even say it this way. I've got a men's course and a women's course. Who's in my women's course? They're all hard-natured women. They're all strong. And they're all married to soft-hearted men.
Right? Yeah. So I got a couple questions for you just to kind of make a picture. First of all, did you have any brothers or sisters?
I had one brother, one sister, and both died in poverty. My brother died overweight. He was very, very heavy, a very chaotic life. My sister, she latched on to an extreme Christianity and she died. And so the reason I know this, I know her only son, who's my nephew. And so what happened to him? He became an alcoholic, right? And then he entered AA and AA saved him, literally saved him and gave him a life where he actually had a normal life, right? But my sister was full of chaotic ideas. And so I have me, my brother and sister, and we're coming out of this chaotic family where my gambling father and my alcoholic mother really couldn't give them the ideas for a normal life. They just couldn't give it to them.
So I'm assuming that all three of you are considered soft-hearted.
Yeah. Yes. Well, yeah, I think we're all soft-hearted. That's right.
All right. So all three of you were soft-hearted. And were you in the same age range? Did you grow up together?
To me, as a little kid, I'm the youngest. They were really old, but they were only like 2 years older.
Oh, okay.
I thought they were pretty cool.
So as far as sibling bonding, they didn't have that either.
No bonding. Now as you brought that up, there was no bonding. And so because there was no bonding at that young age, my brother was a rebel. My sister was very dependent. And I was like exploring, like, what am I supposed to end up in? I ended up in this 40-year marriage to Marcia, and that was my school. That's where I really learned everything that I could learn. And I learned it under pain and pressure. But without pain and pressure, you don't have a school, right? So when you go to college, you go to college, you're supposed to learn in an environment where it's kind of pressury. And so they kind of create a pressury environment with study, right? But when you have a person who's your teacher, and that person is very, very opposite from you, you're under a lot of pain and you're struggling to I want to run away, but I can't. And so now I have to stay and learn. But staying and learning was the greatest challenge that I could do. What was I really diving into? I was diving into the realm of ideas, because this is not about body parts. This is not about behaviors, what you say with your mouth and what you do with your body. This is about the mind. The whole thing in that 40 years was about the mind. And so what we're talking about in the mind, we're talking about the whole negative side of the mind, and we're talking about the whole positive side of the mind. And so what I was trying to do, why was I writing and studying and going to seminars and all these things I was trying to find? I was trying to find ideas. Ideas saved me. Ideas did that. And so when we look at in the United States, what's on every corner? Well, there's a bar. What's on every corner of every town? There's a church, right? A church and a bar, right? What does it represent? That represent a longing for goodness and a longing for for happy independency. Yeah, escapism, all those things are represented by a bar, right? So you remember how Prohibition happened? Prohibition was a terrible failure. And what actually made Prohibition what it was made by women. The women said, this is real. And by the way, Carrie Nations, that's a historical figure. She was a real hard-natured woman. And a hard-natured woman thought, hey, here's what we have to do, stomp this out, right? Well, that's how hard-natured women do it. They stomp out what they don't like. So Prohibition was a terrible failure for all kinds of reasons. And then when we step into this world of, I'm in this hard marriage to a hard woman, and I have to learn something. So one of the first things I learn about the 4 personalities. And I ended up calling them fun, control, perfect, and peace, right? And this comes from Hippocrates, who taught about this thousands of years ago. But fun, control, perfect, and peace. So fun women are very social women. They're very lively and very entertaining, and they have a big circle of friends. And so then we have, that's a soft nature, by the way. Fun is a soft nature. Then peace is the other one. That's also a soft nature. And so what's a peace nature? A peace most likely is to shut down when there's any conflict. Peace people don't like conflict. They can't live in conflict. So they shut down, and they're very quiet, and they're very key to themselves, and they don't have a big circle of friends, and they don't have a big social life, right? So that's the second world. So fun and peace. And those are 2 soft natures. And then the other 2 natures are hard natures, control and perfect. Control nature is a nature that wants to control the environment of the world out there. And the perfect nature wants to make the world get fixed and changed in be what they want it to be. And they have ideals, and they have things that they should be and ought to be. And they have this whole meticulous analysis of what's wrong and how do we fix it. And so really people in education and religion, they're really big, perfect people, right? So the 2 natures that are hard are control and perfect. And when you put them together, because you have a first and a second, and if you're a control person and your second nature is perfect, you're a control perfect person. Or if we go to a perfect control person, that's a very hard nature. 2 hard natures combined in one. So my wife, Marcia, was control perfect, right? What was I? I was fun, peace, right? So we had this split now. This is Hippocrates now who taught us this, right? And this is my simplification. Here I was split, and I realized, oh, I'm on the soft side. She's on the hard side, right? So I started to realize, oh, that's what she's supposed to do. She's supposed to be hard. I'm supposed to be soft. This is my way. This is her way. And so I started to realize there's things about her that I need to understand. There's things about myself I need to accept, and things I need to like about myself. Because, when you come out of a chaos childhood, you don't really like yourself very much. And in extreme cases, you really don't love yourself and can't love yourself because you don't think highly of yourself. Because when your parents' attention is away from you, and there's all kinds of versions of doing that, but it's not on you. And because it's not on you, you start to think, well, what's wrong with me? Well, that builds into a story of what's wrong with me. That's a story of, like, I'm not enough. I'm not good enough. I'm not right enough. I'm not desirable enough. So all of that starts to build in the life you end up living as an adult. And so when we're born, we've got those first 10 years. That's the time when the parents pour in all the stuff of these ideas. Because remember, ideas are what we're working with. And so after the first 10 years, you enter your teens. And you know how parents talk about teens, right? And so what's happening there? That's the testing time. All this stuff they give you in the first 10, I'm going to test it in the second 10. So during the teen years, I'm going to find out if this is right. And I'm going to push, and I'm going to shove, and I'm going to demand, and I'm going to do all those things. So that's what the teen years are about. The teen years are about trying to figure out, what is this all about? What is it for, right? And so when you go through the testing years, you get through and you come out into the indestructible years. That's the 20s. The 20s are when you're going to live forever, and you're never going to die, and you've got all kinds of energy, and you got all kinds of beauty. And what does the culture do? They take the 20s and they hold them up as icons of what's valuable. And they say the youth is the 20s is, man, you're hot, you're cool. And they come up with all these words, right? And so that's your indestructible time. But then after your indestructible time, you enter your 30s. And when you enter your 30s, now you're going like, oh, wait a minute, I thought that this was true. I thought this worked this way. And now you're getting things corrected on you, right? Because that's the time when you start to realize, oh, wait a minute, this isn't working the way I thought it was going to work. And so you go through your 30s and then you enter your 40s. And so your 30s and 40s, that's the place where the midlife crisis actually occurs between 35 and 45. And what is the midlife crisis? The midlife crisis is abandonment, abuse, and neglect. Those ideas from childhood, they come in the 30s and 40s. And they come like a bull in a china shop. And I get to see these people. I get to meet them and talk to them, right? I get to see how bad is it, right? Because who's calling me? Who's calling me is what I call the stayer, right? And I don't get to talk to the lever. I get to talk to the stayer. And so all my perspective about chaos kids comes from stayers who are talking to me about their chaos kids. And they're saying, he did this and he did different. It said all these terrible things, right? And so I ended up talking about the values of a 10 and the values of a 0. And so what's the values of a 10? The values of a 10 are things like commitment and loyalty and competence and service and kindness and sharing and accepting. And right, what are the values of a 0? So the values of a 0 become survival, gossip, defensiveness, worry, frustration, fear, right? That's all the values. And literally it's values. It's how you literally process what's happening to you, right? So what happens is these people who are stayers, usually raised high on the scale, call me about their levers, raised low on the scale, right? So the high on the scale calls me about a low on the scale. And they say, they did these 2,300 things. I want to tell you all about them, right? And so I think, you don't have to tell me all about them, right? You're married to a 2, right? You're a 10 married to a 2, or you're a 10 married to a 0, or you're an 8 married to a 1, right? Whatever the combination is, it's a high person on the scale raised in a great home to a person who's raised in a troubled home. And so what are we talking about now? We're talking about parenting. Parenting is what this is all about. And so when we look at, so we're in 2024, but I could be talking to you in 2001. I could have been talking to you in 1978, right? But of course there were no podcasts at the time, right?
Great.
But whatever time frame you're in, we still have this same thing. Parenting has to make a kid. It has to make a kid who becomes a citizen, right? And so I spent some time with prisoners in a minimum security prison, and I interviewed them, and I told them about the scale, 10 to 0, right? And they all told me, I'm a 0, I'm a 1, I'm a 2, right? They all identified as where they came from on the scale, right? So what do we do with prisons? We're building prisons to put these citizens who would have been citizens, but now they can't be citizens. Why? Because they're chaos kids, and they're chaos kids who just didn't make the right decisions at the right times, right? So when we come in and start asking, this is all about parents. Well, what happens with parents? Well, we have caring parents who literally, they might have had chaos childhoods, but they're very determined to be higher on the scale. They're determined to borrow values that actually become really good. And so these people are, and you see them in the media, you see them, they really had troubled homes, but they grab something in the world of ideas and they hold on to them. So, you told me about some of your challengers, right? And what are they all doing? They are all bucking a trend of whatever they're given in childhood, and they're snapping out of it in a really big way. They're leaving the childhood that they were given and choosing a big one every day. And that's what happens to people who are trying to get up to the top of the scale and saying, I'm not going to leave the way I was raised. And by the way, these people, I call them buckers, like a bucking bronco. They're a bucking bronco because they go through 3 steps, literally every minute of every day. Number 1, they say, stop, not doing that. And what they're doing is the idea came up from below and they said, stop, I'm not doing that. The second step, they say, I'm doing this instead. And what are they doing there? They're choosing a value from the top of the scale, somewhere in the top of the scale. I'm going to do this instead. So they have enough awareness to go, I'm doing a better value, right? Well, I'm going with honesty. I'm going with integrity. I'm going with commitment, right? I'm doing some of these good values, right? And why'd they do that? Because in the first step, they bucked the value of that they were given. And then they do the second step, choosing the better value. And then the third step, they live out the value in spite of a lot of obstacles and a lot of frustration from personal life and the community and social world. They still do it. And so they're buckers. But the weird thing about buckers is they end up snapping. And the reason they do is because they're literally using willpower to crush down the values they were given. And so when I was talking about the values that were given, selfishness, lying, gossip, defensiveness, worry, what are those? Those are the values of a troubled person. A troubled person has those values. They cling on to those things as a troubled person does, right? And so what does a bucker do? They say, stop, I'm not doing that. I'm doing this instead. And then they go live it out. Step 1, 2, 3, over and over again. For years, they end up snapping. And they end up snapping because they can't say stop anymore. And so when they can't say stop anymore, what happens? That flood of what's coming from down there, from that lower place of the mind, it comes up, and it comes up so fiercely that it literally can change their personality. So a person who was religious is now an atheist. A person who used to smoke is now smoking like a fiend. A person who denied that alcohol was a good thing is now clutching the bottle, right? Whatever they're doing, they literally get flooded with, and that's a really traumatic childhood literally coming for them. And so to imagine being the spouse of a person who's raised low on the scale, and all of a sudden this all comes, So what did the culture do? The culture made the midlife crisis kind of a joke. They said, well, that's a man who gets a sports car and like a red sports car. That's what they did. They made a joke of it, right? But I'm in the trenches with midlife crisis. I'm talking to the people. I'm seeing what happens to their lives, and I see how painful it is. And so that caused me to write a book that's coming out this next year called This Is Not the Woman I Married. And it's a book for men. This is not the woman I married, where I actually took all of the ideas that I really believe in and I packed it into this book. And who are they? They're men who marry women who are raised at a 2 or a 1 or a 3 or a 0, right? That's who they are. And so that's who I talk to every day. I talk to people who are marrying these chaos kids. Yes, I do know. But here's what I don't know. I don't know who's going to become the life-changing challenger. I don't know that because something in the heart creates the spark that actually makes the life-changing challenger who does something from down here. I'm a 98-pound weakling, all right? And I'm going to snap and I'm going to become this person in 18 months who becomes a big change. What does that? Something in the heart is there. Something lights a fire in them that lights them up and makes them say, I'm going to get through this. I'm going to do what was not done before. And they do that over and over and over again. And they succeed because you got the evidence. You've seen it because you're there, you're working with it. So all of that to say that where am I going in my whole education process? I'm learning through pain. And that's the best place to be. When you're in pain, when you're hurting, when you're losing, when things are falling, when things are failing, when all that's collapsing on you, that's the best time to learn everything because you can't learn when you're happy. You can't learn at Disneyland. Nobody learns anything at Disneyland. They're too happy, right? So when you're really happy, you're not going to learn anything. But when you're in pain, you're going to learn a lot. And why do you learn in pain? You learn in pain because you're hurting and you're so hurting that you really are like now focused on your attention. Like, ooh, why is this? I remember me with the yellow legal pads. Like, why was I writing and writing and writing? What was driving it is I was really hurting because when I was going to get up and stand up and go back out to my life with Marcia, I was going to have to face my real situation. I was going to have to deal with that in some kind of productive way. And so my productive choice was, I'm going to start to change the meaning of what happens to my events. Because what does it mean? Like when she's mean to me, what does it mean? Does it mean I'm a loser, that these terrible things she said I was? Is that what it means? Or am I changing the meaning of it? No, it doesn't mean that. It means this, right? And so when I come up for this, what is that this? This is, I have value. I have talents. I've got abilities. I've got things, right? I'm not going to look at my string of mistakes. I'm going to say that string of mistakes is my learning path, right? That's when I say it was sloppy and messy, right? You say it was sloppy and messy because if we look at in terms of time, 1974 was the beginning of my learning process, right? So somewhere during that learning process, I think like maybe 3 years, 4 years into it, we separated, and we separated for a year. And then during that separation, she came back and stormed the house I was living in. And then there was a thing where the police came to the house because she kicked the door down, right? So the police dragged us down to the station, right? And so they found that this was just an arguing couple. It's like, we're policemen. We don't know what to do with this. Like, you two could just walk home, right? Right. So they drove us down to the squad car, but they didn't let us get a ride back. So we're walking back. And so I remember, because like I'm in my 20s, I don't know anything. All I know is I'm afraid, I'm frustrated, I'm angry. I wanna talk about what I'm afraid of. And so I'm walking with her, and we're walking under a street light, and I stop and I say, if you make me stay with you, I'm going to die. You know what she said? She said, okay, then die then. Wow. That's the kind of stuff that is happening when you're living in chaos, right? Because we were both chaos kids. And so we're both at the bottom of the scale, and we're both having to find some way to make a productive life, right? So she pulled a productive life out of this chaos. And so we had kids, and we kept on doing the things, taking them to school. And so there was an incident with my first daughter was like 7 years old. And she came home and told Marcia, this kid punched me. And you know what she did? She said, where is he? She went down to the school. She found the kid. She grabbed him by the shoulders. And she said, if you ever look badly at her, if you ever get near her, if you ever intend anything, I will come and find you, right? That terrified the kid. The kid's 7 years old, right? But that's her way. That was her way, right? Everything. That's what strong women do, right? So I'm just singling out that little incident to illustrate what hard-natured women do. So there is a hard-natured men, and they attract soft-hearted women. And so that flip-flop, just the same kind of thing. Hard and soft come together. And soft-natured women are really soft. They're really tender and nurturing and feeling, and they cry at movies, and they want close friends. And right. So when you learn about soft and hard, you start opening up a whole world that actually entered the two soft natures and the two hard natures I was talking about, right? It kind of brings you into that world, and you start to realize, oh, I'm talking to soft-hearted people here. I'm talking to a hard-natured person here, right? And when you start to learn who they are and what they're like and what they want to choose, you start feeling wiser, and you start making less mistakes, right? So my path was 27 years of a marriage made in hell, and so when we got to the end of that 27 years, how did we get to the end of that? Well, we got to the end of it because I was internalizing ideas, and what I internalized was ideas about meaning. And because I call it the most important idea is the meaning and the movie. The meaning you make and the movie you see. The meaning you make and the movie you see. So what is the meaning? When you have an event happen, what does the event mean? That's a great question to ask. What does this event mean? Does it mean all the negative things on the chaos side? Or does it mean all the positive side on the purpose side of the scale? Does it have purpose in it? Is there purpose in this? What is it for? Or is it chaotic and I'm no good and all this stuff? So what I'm doing is I'm living a life of moving ideas to where we want to move. And what is that? That's all about meaning. Because when you start to move towards meaning, you start to calm down. You start to slow down. Because, when I talk to people, they're in a really chaotic state because their whole life turned upside down with this person becoming this new personality. And so I have to say, they say, what should I do? I said, what you should do in your mind. And what you should do in your mind is keep one word, because that's about all you can handle. One word, and that word is calm. And when you have the word calm, you will slow down your mind, because the word calm is the energy of calm. And all the words that are synonyms to the word calm, those are all supportive of the word calm. And so easy, casual, light, friendly, calm, slow down, ease yourself into a new meaning that I can get through this. I can believe in ideas, and ideas change my world, because that's what happens to me. I change my world with ideas. So what happened is, in 27 years of the marriage made in hell, is I started to love myself more. I started to feel better about myself. And as I started to feel better about myself, Marcia became less intense, because soft is chaos to her, because she's hard. Soft is, the more soft I am, the more squishy, the more unpredictable I am, the more that threatens her. And so I started to feel more confident about myself, and not confident in a pushy kind of way, but confident in that I can do this. I can get through this web of ideas, and I can start to grab onto ideas that mean something to me, that actually I like. And so I started to become a person who liked myself, loved myself, started to respect myself. And so she started to do that, and she started to follow me. And when she started to follow me, our life got better. And so that's the 27 years. Now, remember, I'm buried 40 years. And at the 40th year, that's when she dies. And I think in the whole ethereal scheme of life, I think she died because I didn't need her anymore. I didn't need to be with this learning person, this teacher who was my teacher. And I really owe her a great debt of gratitude for teaching me all the stuff that I've learned in the world of ideas. Just so it became years. And Larry gets to love himself. And then finally she comes to the end of her life in the 40-year story. So that brings me to after she dies, I'm 3 years alone, and 3 years alone without my teacher, without my pressure. Right. And so I had no pressure, and I started to gee, well, what am I doing here? Right. And so I had a therapist, and she said, "You're too young. You need a relationship." And so I said, "Well, so what do I do?" She said, "Well, start writing a story of who you're looking for." And so I wrote a story of who I was looking for. And I wrote the story in great detail, talked about her family, talked about her friends, talked about her work environment, and I literally described this whole picture of this woman, right? And so what happened in 2023, I go on a hike and I meet a woman who is looking for real love. And so I meet her that day, and I knew something was really different, because energetically she was really in line with me. And so we ended up getting married. So we meet and we marry 1 year later. So that's what happens. And so what I have now is I have a different brand of teacher. This brand of teacher is a woman who teaches me out of wisdom, out of strength, out of kindness, out of insight, all kinds of things that are very different than my 40 years with Marcia. So it's like a life that I call her my kaleidoscope. She's my kaleidoscope. And the reason she's my kaleidoscope is because she's always changing how you look through the kaleidoscope and all the colors keep changing. Right. Well, that's kind of what she is. She's changing her energies, and I'm responding to her energies. And it's a really valuable place for me to be, because it's another new place for me to learn. So that's what I have now. I have a second marriage.
That's amazing. So I'm going to work backwards a little bit, but all right. So you said there was the 4 types: the soft-hearted and the long and the strong, hard natured. I'm sorry,
Hard natured,
fun,
control. So the 2 soft natures are fun and peace. The 2 hard natures are perfect and control.
Perfect and control, fun and peace. So would you say that your new wife is controlled and fun, or is she peace and perfect?
She is fun and perfect. So she's on both sides.
Nice. Nice. Because the way you talked about it, I was like, oh, she's got a little bit of each. Oh, see, I'm already learning something. Right. So I do have a question. I want to step back just a little bit, because I want to put some context around this, a little visual about it. Can you give me like a normal day during the time you were married to your first wife before the 27-year change? So what was a typical day? You come home and what would happen?
So if there was a typical day, and I like to think there was no typical day, because what was happening is her strength was always making something happen. So there was trees to trim, there was leaves to rake, there were cats to go find, there was a rescue, right? So there's always something happening because the strong woman is always making something happen. And so what I had to do is I had to say, okay, so this is my job to step into this world of activity and not hate it. Not like, oh, I'm so exhausted. When are you going to just stop? Right. Not do that. Just say, okay, I can accept that this is her way. This is the way she wants to live. And so what can I do to live in this world of activity and action, this world of decision making, this world of debate? Like debate, I don't like debate. Right. So
Right, yeah, no, because you don't like conflict.
right. So we had 2 kids, and if we talk in their childhood years, we did a lot of things to keep them to have them have a stable home. But at times she couldn't control her temper, and so they got to see that, right? And so they got to see how mad she could get, right? And how she determined that something should be fixed and all those kinds of things. So there was no common typical day, because if I got up in the morning and like, oh, what's going to happen today? Well, I couldn't predict that, because she was always like a roulette wheel. It was always going to be an unpredictable, right? So that was the unpredictableness of my world, was the way the world was, right? But I had to live with the unpredictableness and roll with the punches.
Right. So during this time, what were you doing for work?
So I was in advertising. I was a creative guy. So writing and graphic design and all the things, the visual stuff in advertising.
Did she work or was she a homemaker?
No, she did not work. And she did not work because her mother did not work ever. And because her mother never worked, she never worked. This is back in the 70s. And so we got into a really tough spot back in the 70s because I couldn't find a job. And so you have to go to job service. And she came with me to job service, and she was wearing her full-length rabbit coat. And she had hair down to her kneecaps, right? So she was a sight to see, like, who is this woman? This is like a spectacular thing, right? And so the person working at the job service said, well, so what are you going to do for a living? And she says, I don't work. As a hard-natured woman, I don't work. And what she was saying is, my mother didn't work. Why should I work? Right.
We'd call that entitled.
But I had to work because I had to find a way to support this family. So I always was pushing to find a way to support the family. And so, as you evolved over 10, 20, 30, 40 years, you go through a lot of discoveries and a lot of things that happen to you make like oh, that didn't work last time. I got to do this different this time, right? Because nothing is going to be predictable. And it's like there's a beauty in not being predictable, right? But in your mind, as you calm your mind down, as you start to slow your mind down, this is not about things in the world. This is about ideas in the mind. And so what kind of ideas in the mind do I want to have? Do I want to have, like, what is my value? My value in my ideas in my mind is commitment. And so in the later part of the 40 years, I was committed. I was not staying this because I was married, stay married, and stay miserable. I was not staying there. I was now living in a stay committed, because commitment is the right thing to do, right? So that was a different idea that was keeping me alive, keeping me going, right? Because the more you look at what you don't want, the more you get what you don't want. The more you look at what you do want, the more you get what you do want. And that seems simple. Like, can that really be true, right? When you think about what you do want, I've asked a lot of people, tell me what you want. And they give me 50-word essays because they don't know what they want. they're exploring all kinds of things because they don't know what they want. But when you think about what you want, it's almost like you have to do what I did, grab a yellow legal pad and slow down and start to ask, what do I believe? Why do I believe it? Now that two-question system, what do I believe and why do I believe it, is really great as a teacher, because you start to ask, what do I believe? And then you start saying things that you were taught. You start repeating your parents.
Yes.
You start repeating what they believe. And then you start digging a little deeper. What do I really believe? And why do I really believe it? The deeper you dig, the more you slow down and start to ask harder and harder questions. And it keeps you moving towards a place where you're thinking straight. You're thinking about what you really do believe and why you really do believe it. And then you find out, oh, that's what I really believe in. I believe in what my father believed in, and I still believe it, right? I believe in what my mother believed in, and I still believe it. And so there's where I am. What do I believe in what I believe? I believe what mom did.
Right. It was a long time before I started to deviate from my father,
Yeah.
from what he believed.
Yeah.
Now, core beliefs are still pretty much aligned, but there are some other beliefs that as I gained some world experience,
Yeah.
I was able to deviate from. We have separate thoughts on abortion. We both have separate thoughts on the environment. But as far as a lot of the other things go, we're pretty much aligned. I can literally tell you the experiences that made me really think about what I believed and why I believed it. I could tell you the exact experience of how it happened, when it happened, and I could tell you exactly what happened there. Interesting is, let's just to make this a little bit less serious at the moment, but interesting enough is, where did you spend most of your time?
West side of Chicago. The west side of Chicago. Yeah. Right before the suburbs began. The city of Chicago stopped a line. There's the suburbs. That's where I saw it.
Was it like Riverside? On that?
Cicero Park. Yes.
The Cicero Park. Okay, yeah. So I know that because I'm from the area too. But I'm from northwest suburbs. So, but I also worked and lived in downtown as well. So yeah, as when you said that west side, I was like, okay, yeah, it's somewhere on that. I grew up thinking that I was gonna live in Oak Park. I wanted to live in Oak Park. I had this big thing, and then I moved out of state. So, and then that never happened. But I always like, Oak Park, Riverside, Oak Park. I'm like, yeah, that's cool, man. I like that area. I was never Waukegan, Wilmette area. That was like too rich for me. And all I thought about is, yeah, you can have one of those houses, but you got to clean it. And I'm like, that's amazing. Where do you live now?
So I end up through lots of bouncing in Wisconsin, in Oconomowoc, Wisconsin.
Oh, okay, cool.
So that's where I ended up. I ended up in a small town, even though I didn't grow up in a small town. I ended up in a small town.
That seems to be where it goes. I know a lot of people that started out in big city and now are in small towns, and I know a lot of people that were in small towns that are now in big cities, or at least are in a suburb or something that they have access to it. So that makes perfect changes. So I just want to mention that, first of all, what you gave us today was absolutely incredible, and I think the amount of information that you gave us, able to identify ourselves as either hard or soft-hearted, and one of the 4 types. So I think that's amazing. Is there a difference when you deal with clients that are where the husband is hard and the wife is soft, or vice versa? Is there a difference of the way that you coach them, or is it the same?
So when I know that a person is in a country like fun and peace, I know they're soft. And when they're in the hard side, I know they're hard. And so when I'm talking to a couple, I'm asking the hard guy or the hard woman, tell me if you understand him, her, as this nature that doesn't see things the way you do, right? So I'm really asking about, are you willing to come over here and understand this? Are you willing to come and speak French when you go to France? Right? Because some people, that they're not really at a place where they can really learn. And so they really are more committed to being upset and being demanding. And I got to find out, are they really stuck in their way? Or are they able to come to the other side and start to say, well, what can I learn about you and the way you see events, the way you see things? Because when you hear an idea, that's absolutely opposed to everything you believe in, it's very hard to process it. Because when you hear it, like, well, this is so not what I believe in. This is so not right. And then you see that with couples, and not just politically, but energetically. In energy, the hard nature is an energy force itself that processes everything through a really hard thing. And as you get more severe in that hardness, you become less willing to listen, less willing to hear, less willing to compromise or cooperate or even ask about your point of view because it's too severe to listen. So we see that obviously politically, but we can see it in religion. We can see it in education. There's all kinds of ways to take a subject field and get really, really tight and narrow in its extreme. And when you get tight and narrow in its extreme, you can't really hear anymore. You can't ask open-ended questions because you're personally too threatened. And now your energy is all disturbed because you're being threatened by that idea. And so like Marsha's hardness, for instance, was when she was very extreme, because when I was more of a threat to her, she became more extreme down that extreme pipeline of control and perfect. She became more controlling, more perfect oriented. So all the qualities of control and perfect people, she increased them and they got tighter and tighter and tighter. And so she was a lot less willing to listen. Right. And so when I went to my soft side, I got extreme in my soft side. So we ended up in those two things. And this happened over the years. We would get tighter and tighter in our extremes, and then we get looser and looser and looser. And that's actually how we raise kids. We got looser and looser away from our levels of extremes, and we couldn't listen anymore, and we couldn't hear it. And that was one of the things I learned. I learned that when you get really extreme, you can't hear anymore. And the more you become less extreme, the more you get to this, like her hardness became less hard, my softness became less soft. And as we come into this closer area of I'm willing to ask questions and she's willing to ask questions, and that became more what they call reasonable, right?
So it sounds just right back to where we end up back to what everybody says, compromise. A little bit, the soft becomes a little bit harder. The hard becomes a little bit softer. And so we meet somewhere in the middle.
That's right. Well, that's what the idea of reasonable is. Reasonable. Well, you can't reason if you're in an extreme. And when you're in an extreme, reason is over, right?
Well, that is definitely a lot to think about. And I think with America having a divorce rate of 50%, these are ideas that need to be shared. And you are doing that now. You can see some more resources, and he's got some courses and stuff, and he's at youcansavethis.marriage.com. And you've got to check this out because his website is loaded with information, blog, courses, reviews, all about this. And you can learn a little bit more about him. You can book a strategy call, and you definitely need to check this out. And there's just so much information out there about Larry, about his courses, and you really, really need to check that out. Again, that's youcansavethis.marriage.com. I'm going to go ahead and put that in the show notes. I see that you are on some social media outlets. Which one would you say is your most active?
So
Where are you?
A way to get a lot of Larry Bilotta ideas is through YouTube videos. So if you go to YouTube and do Larry Bilotta, you go to the Larry Bilotta channel, and that's a place where like all the ideas that I've been talking about are there in some video form.
And this channel looks like it's really laid out really nicely. He's got some shorts and some Q&As. He's got stuff on midlife crisis. So definitely go and check that out. But Larry, I really appreciate you joining us today. I think what you put out here is really a different way of looking at finding ways to save our marriages, especially in an environment where half of our marriages are not being successful. Yes. So thank you so much. I really appreciate that. All right. So for the rest of you, check this out. I'll have all that stuff in the show notes. If you check us out on YouTube, please go ahead and hit subscribe and like it and hit the notification bell so you'll know when the next episode comes out. If you're listening to us on a podcast directory like Apple or Spotify, please go ahead and leave a review. If you don't like the show, leave a bad review. So at least I get some feedback and I can make it better. And the next time you decide to check out an episode, it'll be just that much better. So go ahead and do that too, if that's what you want to do. Of course, we prefer good reviews, but if you've got something to say, just go ahead and say it. I appreciate you all listening, and we will see you in the next one. Well, that wraps up another episode of Life-Changing Challengers. I'm your host, Brad Minus, saying thank you for joining us on this journey of transformation. If today's stories inspired you, please take a moment to review, share, and follow us on your favorite podcast platform. Your support helps us reach more listeners and create an even bigger impact. Remember, every challenge is a chance to grow. Until next time, keep pushing, keep challenging, and never stop pursuing your extraordinary.